Hello, in this video I'm going to talk about how we might symbolize contrastive and. So what is contrastive and in the first place? Well, it's really contrastive variants of and. So what are those? Well, words like although, even though, but, and yet. So the question we're going to ask, and we're going to end up saying yes, is can we symbolize these words with our wedge, with our symbolic and? So one thing we want to ask is, when is an and sentence true? So box and circle is true. Well, pretty obviously it's true if and only if both of the conjuncts are true. If both box and circle are true, then box and circle is true. And if the sentence box and circle is true, then box is true. Also circle is true. Okay, well, what about a but sentence? You might think, yeah, box but circle is true if box is true and also circle is true. And it's true only if they're both true. So if that's the case, then we could symbolize but with our and symbol. But and and would mean basically the same thing, it would seem like, if that's right about the truth conditions of a but sentence. So we want to ask, is this the case? Is it the case that square but circle is true if and only if square and circle are true? That would mean that square and circle is true if and only if square but circle is true. So is that true? Well, let's look at this sentence. The plane is heavy but it can fly. Well, suppose that the plane is heavy but it can fly is true. Suppose it is true. What else is true? Well, then the plane is heavy. The plane can fly. So the plane is heavy and it can fly is true. So we can go from the but sentence to an and sentence. If the but sentence is true, then the and sentence is true, at least in this case. What about going the other way? What if the and sentence is true? Well, it seems like, yeah, if the and sentence is true, then if the plane is heavy and also the plane can fly, then the plane is heavy but it can fly is true. So at least in this case, we can say the plane is heavy but it can fly, or we can say the plane is heavy and it can fly. And those will always agree. They will either both be true or they will both be false. Well, that was one case where an and sentence and a but sentence agree, but we want to know, do they always agree? So suppose box and circle is true, is box but circle always true? And also true? And if box but circle is true, then is box and circle true? Do they always have the same truth value? Or do they differ sometimes? And the problem is, it's going to look like maybe the following can happen. Maybe box and circle can be true while box but circle is false. So they can disagree. One is true, the and sentence is true, while the other, the but sentence, is false. So here's an example. He is cheerful and happy. That could be true. It wouldn't have to be true. You could say it of someone who is not cheerful or who is not happy, but it certainly could easily be true with no problem whatsoever. Now suppose it is true, and then you were to say, he is cheerful but happy. That sounds weird. It sounds off. He is cheerful and happy sounds like, yeah, I have no problem saying that. He is cheerful but happy, it sounds weird. So the question is it false? If you meet someone who's cheerful and they're happy, and you say he is cheerful, you meet a guy, and you say he is cheerful but happy, is what you said false. If it is false, if that sentence is false, then we can't symbolize but with and. And so that could be a problem. In that case, the and sentence is true, but the but sentence is false, and our symbolizations should always have the same truth values as the sentence they are symbolizations of. So we have a potential problem. Well, there are two possible reasons why he is cheerful but happy is weird. Two different ways, different explanations we might give of that. So the first explanation is very straightforward. The sentence is false. If I say he is cheerful but happy, what I've said is false, and that's why it sounds weird to say. So specifically, you might think, he is cheerful but happy. That sentence is true only if, first of all, he is cheerful. He's got to be cheerful for the sentence to be true. Also, he's happy. He's got to be happy for the sentence to be true. And finally, there's got to be a contrast between being happy and being cheerful. That's for the sentence to be true. But of course, there isn't a contrast between being happy and being cheerful. They go together very nicely. And so this C condition is false. There is no contrast between being happy and being cheerful. No tension, So there's no contrast, and so the sentence is false. If I say he's cheerful but happy, have I said something true? No. Why? Well, even though he's cheerful and he's happy, there's not a contrast, but what I said requires there to be a contrast to be true, and so what I said is false. And if that were the case, then but and sentences would disagree sometimes, when you could say the and sentence whether or not there's a contrast and speak truly, but if you say the but sentence, there needs to be a contrast, and when there's not, then the sentence would be false. So if that were the case, then we couldn't symbolize but sentences with and. However, there's another possible explanation of the weirdness, which is that it's pragmatically inappropriate. Well, what does that mean? Well, suppose what it means is basically the sentence is true. What it says about the world strictly on its own is true, but it's somehow mistaken or off or inappropriate to say it for some other reason. Suppose we're at dinner or at a meal, and I ask you, can you pass the salt? Can you please pass the salt? And suppose that you just said yes, and then continued eating. That would be rude, right? That would not be obnoxious. But why? I mean, if I say, can you pass the salt? You've said, well, he asked me a question. He wanted to know something, and I gave him the answer. I said, in fact, yes, I can do it. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that I wasn't asking you this question to find out about your ability to pass the salt. I knew that you had the ability, and when I asked you, I was calling your attention to your having the ability so that you would exercise it. And you know that. And so when you said just say yes and continue eating, you're ignoring your sort of what I literally say you're addressing, but you're ignoring the obvious suggestion. You should pass the salt. So similarly, if you were to say, oh, well, I met this person and blah, 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 and this man, and he's this way and that way and the other way, and the person says, oh, well, what does he look like? And, well, he's got a great personality. You're kind of suggesting, well, maybe he's not so attractive. That's not part of what you literally say. He might, what you say is literally about his personality, but in not directly answering the question, you're implying that you don't want to answer the question. Why don't you want to answer the question? Well, because it's not a nice thing to say. So in these cases, we can see that there's what you literally say when you ask, can you pass the salt? You're literally just asking for a question about a fact. Do you have the ability or not? We say he has a great personality. That might suggest something about the person's appearance, but it doesn't literally say anything about it. So there's what the sentence literally says, and then there's what it communicates or suggests, what it communicates or suggests in a particular use, in a particular conversation with particular people at a particular time. So really there are two aspects of the meanings of words on this approach. There's what the sentence sort of, how it describes the world as being, is it true or false, and then what it suggests. And you might think, well, with the cheerful but happy sentence, that sentence is true, but it's inappropriate because it's only suggesting a contrast. So what we see is that these sentences, they communicate more than they literally say or ask. And so there are two parts to a sentence's meaning. There are the truth conditions. Those are the conditions under which it's true, and the conditions under which it's false. They say that the sentence says the world is a certain way, and either it is or it isn't, and the sentence is true or false. But then there's a second aspect to it, which are what we call the pragmatic features, which has to do with how it's used in communication and what, for example, suggestions it's used to make. So you might think, aha, P but Q, that's what's going on with this sentence. Specifically, it literally says the same thing as P and Q. It has the same truth conditions as P and Q. P but Q is true if both P and Q are true. It's false if one of them is false. So it's true if and only if P and Q are each true. But it also, unlike an and sentence, suggests a contrast. It doesn't say there's a contrast. It's not part of what the sentence by itself says, but it communicates or suggests that there's a contrast between P's being true and Q's being true. When there is no actual contrast, as in the cheerful but happy case, then it's weird to suggest that there is. You say he's cheerful but happy. What you literally said is he's cheerful and he's happy, and then you've also suggested there's a contrast. And it's weird to suggest that there's a contrast in that case because there isn't one. And that's why the sentence seems weird. It's not because it's false. It's because you suggested there's a contrast when there's not. So we're going to assume reason 2. We're going to say that it's part of the meaning of the sentence that it suggests that there's a contrast between its two components, but it doesn't literally say that there is. It's not part of the sentence's truth conditions that there's a contrast. It's not for the sentence to be true. In other words, there doesn't have to be a contrast. And our logical vocabulary doesn't have pragmatic meaning. It only has truth conditional meaning. And so, as far as the truth conditions go, box but circle and box and circle or box wedge circle all mean the same thing. So we're going to say, okay, there's this suggestion of a contrast with words like but that's not part of its truth conditions, and we're only trying to capture truth conditions, and so we're going to go ahead and symbolize but and other contrastives with the and symbol, just like we symbolize and. Does that capture all of the meaning of a but sentence? It doesn't, because it doesn't capture the suggestion, but we're not trying to capture that aspect of meaning in our symbolization, and so it's okay to symbolize but sentences with our and symbol. And the same is true although, and even though, and yet sentences.